This is a topic I find personally more interesting, so we'll see how I do. I give this talk actually to a lot of patients, and so it's very rare that I actually get to give this to healthcare professionals. So let's talk about cataracts. And if we're going to talk about a cataract, we need to define our terms. What exactly is a cataract? Well, let's take an eye model and some more videos. In fact, if you take an eye model and you open it up and look inside, we all have a little magnifying glass inside there. And that magnifying glass is called the lens. The lens is clear and flexible like a gummy bear, and it can change shape and helps us do a lot of our fine focusing. Now, if that lens becomes cloudy, the ravages of time, ultraviolet light, the buildup of insoluble proteins inside the eye, then this is what we call a cataract. So a cataract is when the lens in the eye becomes cloudy, and that cloudy lens causes vision problems. For most people, the first symptom is nighttime driving, glare, car headlights, things like that. So, if we look at a drawing of the lens inside the eye, you can see that it sits behind the iris. So, the colored part of the eye is up here. The lens sits behind there, and it's actually suspended like a trampoline by little tiny strings called zonules that hold it in place. And it's the tension on these little springs that affects the shape of the lens and thus the focus of the eye. This is a child who has a congenital cataract, and I wanted to show you this video specifically just because you can tell that this is where the lens is, this is where the cataract is. It's behind the pupil. And the reason the pupil is so black is because the inside of the eye is dark. And so you can't normally see a cataract, but in this case you can. This is a really bad cataract. We don't really see these much in this country. This cataract has gotten so cloudy that it almost looks mother of pearl. Really wide dilation here, that's why it looks like that, but really large cataract. Very difficult to get these things out. Most people don't look like that, though. This is what most people look like. Their eye looks normal, but if you shine a light in there just right, you can see that that lens is yellow, it's glowing, it's like you're looking through a cloudy blue blocker or muddy iced tea. And that is a cataract, and that's what we're talking about. So, a little bit about history. Cataract surgery has actually been here for a long, long time. In fact, we think the first cataract surgery was done about 2000 BC in ancient Egypt. And in fact, back then, people would get those big white cataracts we just saw. Cataracts so bad, they couldn't even see the hand in front of their face. And so the pharaoh would say, you get a surgeon to take these things out, and the surgeon would chew on poppy seeds or some other opioid plant and create a mixture, and they would spit this anesthetic in the eye. And they would take a needle, and they'd poke this needle into the eye. And they'd push on that cataract until those little springs broke. And they'd push, and eventually the cataract would fall off into the bottom of the eye and bounce around there the rest of these patients' days. Now, admittedly, these poor Egyptians had very poor vision after this because they're now missing a key component, and they did not have glasses back then. But at least light could get into the eye unimpeded, and they could see the shadow of the pyramids, a little bit of their camel, so this was deemed to be an improvement. This procedure is called couching and is still practiced in some parts of the world today who don't have access to surgery. This was pretty much the state of cataract surgery until World War II, when a bunch of British fighter pilots had their Spitfire cockpit combings made of plexiglass explode on them. They ended up getting shrapnel inside the eye, and this shrapnel floated in there and it stayed in there for years. And the British ophthalmologists were amazed because this plastic did not become infected. The eyes did not become inflamed. It stayed in there inert, and they came up with the idea, maybe, just maybe, we could take a cataract out of the eye, make a new lens out of plexiglass, put it back into the eye, and restore vision that way. And that's how modern cataract surgery first started. So that's exactly what they did. They would take the eye, dilate the pupil very big, make a huge incision, take a cold probe, stick it to that cataract lens so it sticks to it, break the springs, pull the entire cataract out in one big giant piece. And then the question is, where do you put this piece of plexiglass? Because there's not a lot of support structures in the eye. So at first they said, okay, let's try putting it in the front of the eye. So they'd put it here, but it'd rub on the cornea, and they needed corneal transplants and decompensate. So then they tied nylon strings and they suspended it back behind the iris. But nylon over decades will eventually break down, and you end up with a piece of plastic floating inside your eye. It was just not a good situation. So this was the state until maybe the 70s or so. Modern surgery really began because of two discoveries. One was the use of the surgical microscope. You know, previous to this, most surgeries were done with lens loupes, such as this man is holding. So the surgical microscope was the first thing that was required. And the second one was the discovery that the lens that cloudy cataract is not a single piece. It's not a single piece of glass or plastic or tissue. It's more like a peanut M&M in the sense that just like a peanut M&M, it has three layers. There's a hard candy shell, a chocolate layer, and a peanut right in the middle. And it's this three layers that helps us change our surgery technique. In fact, if you look at someone who has a really bad cataract, this cataract has gotten so bad, the chocolate layer has turned into milk chocolate. It's gotten kind of milky and watery. And the peanut has gotten so dense and so heavy, it's actually sunken with gravity into the bottom part of the hard candy shell, which is like a Ziploc bag. It's clear, so you can't really see it that well. So three layers. And it's these three layers, we don't call it the candy shell, we call it the capsule on the outside. And it's not the peanuts, the nucleus in the middle, and the cortex is that part in between. Has changed our cataract surgery. And here's how modern surgery is done today. We make a very small incision, and we take a little bit of the circle off the hard candy shell in the front, make a hole in the capsule so we can get access to the inner part of the cataract. And then we take a device called a phacoemulsification unit that vibrates at very high frequency, and it breaks up the chocolate layers, and it breaks up the peanut into very small parts and allows us to vacuum those out, that very, very small incision. So we've gotten all of the peanut out, but there's still some chocolate in there. There's still some cortex. Let's remove that cortex, and you end up with the hard candy shell, the capsule, which is like a basket now with a hole in the front, and that's where we inject our new implants. They inject into that capsule. The capsule scars with time, holds it in a nice secure position. You're not worried about it falling in the back, and because it scars down so nicely, you're not worried about it going to the front. A very elegant way to do surgery through a very small incision that heals very quickly. And this is what the modern implants look like, except they're, of course, much smaller. But basically, you have a big optic, which is the optical part. With haptic, these are like little arms, and as you can see, they squeeze almost like springs, and that kind of springs out into the edge of the bag to hold it into place. Modern surgery. So there are some new technologies out now that you probably heard of. One of those technologies is an implant that fixes astigmatism. Now, has anyone here been told they have astigmatism? And it's very common. We all have a little bit of astigmatism. So what is it? Well, the surface of the cornea is supposed to be perfectly round like a basketball. It's the same steepness in every meridian. However, when you have astigmatism, the surface of the eye is more like a football. It's a little bit steeper one way, a little bit shallower another way. And because it has two steepnesses, it almost has two focal points. Kids are usually born with their football in a configuration like this, but with time and gravity, our football tends to droop down and look more like that. It's very easy to fix astigmatism glasses. We basically figure out your astigmatism, and we grind the opposite of that football into the glass itself, and they balance each other out. And by balancing each other out, you see well. It's a little bit harder to fix it with contacts because contacts spin. They can put the football on the surface of the contact, but every time you blink, the contact rotates. So they put little microscopic weights, or at least they design it in such a way that it has a tendency to line up right. But astigmatism, what we call toric contacts, work kind of well, but not really well. Now, what if you have a cataract surgery and a lot of astigmatism? What can we do? Well, there is now an implant that will fix it. Basically, they created that football into the implant itself, and when you put it in the eye, we put it in, and then we spin it so it perfectly balances out the cornea's astigmatism and fixes vision that way. These are called toric implants. They are awesome. As far as I'm concerned, there's no real downside to them other than them costing a little bit more. And because they really decrease the need for glasses for people who have a lot of astigmatism. It's a very predictable way to fix astigmatism. Can there be downside? Sure. And this thing can certainly rotate. And if it rotates 5-10 degrees, then you lose some of the effect that you're going for. But in my experience, they work very well, and I'd have no compunction about putting this lens in my own eye. Now, there is another lens that is probably a little bit more exotic and is getting more press and is, for some people, actually used more, and these multifocal implants. You've heard of the Restore lens? Well, here's the problem. We have yet to come up with a lens implant that is as good as our natural lens. Like I've already said, the lens can change shape like a gummy bear, and it's that thickening and flattening that gives us our focus over a wide range. When we hit about age 40, our ability to change shape of the lens, it starts to harden. And it's that hardening of the natural lens in the eye, sort of a pre-cataract, that makes us have to wear reading glasses because we can't get it round enough. We just can't get it to round out to read, and so we need a little bit of extra help with cheaters. Now, we haven't come up with a lens implant that can simulate this effect. And in fact, here's a cartoon, nice and round for near, flat for distance. There's our office, round, flat, and once again, develop a cataract. It's not quite as flexible, and that flexibility loss, that accommodation, is what causes issues. And of course, our implants, those things are rock hard. They're a piece of plastic. They don't change shape at all. So when we set patients, most people we set for good distance vision because that's what people like, but they have problems with near vision. So what do? Well, we haven't come up with an implant that can fix this yet. We haven't come up with something that's flexible that won't cause problems. And there's enough problems with silicone breast implants with flexibility. With the eye, it's even worse because it's a very sensitive structure. So what we can do is we can look in the animal kingdom and see what else has Mother Nature provided with us as a model, something we could copy. And one of the things we can do is go to the sea, because there is a wide variety of eyes out there in the animal kingdom, especially with the invertebrates. I mean, there's compound eyes, there's eye patches, there's mirrors for lenses, there's lots of things. And in fact, if we look at a fish, such as little Nemo here, fish are kind of interesting because they've got rock-hard lenses inside their eyes. If you ever dissected a shark, say in science class, the lens is always like a hard marble. It's round and like a rock. Very similar to our implants inside of our eye. And yet fish are able to focus. They can focus on the sea anemone right in front of them, and they can see the shark coming from far away. How does a fish do it? The way the fish does it is their lens is rock hard and doesn't change shape, but it moves forward and backwards, like a telescope, forward and back, forward and back. That's pretty neat. What if we could make a lens that does that inside the eye? In fact, there is a lens that does that. It's called a crystal lens, and it has hinges on it, and when you read close up, the thing flips forward and backward depending on how the muscles in the eye contract. Sounds great in theory, does not work in practice in my experience. It works somewhat, and I'm sure a drug rep will argue with me if he ever sees this, but really, I don't put them in because I just don't think they work that well. But what a neat idea. So what else do we do? Let's go back to the fish. This is an interesting cartoon fish I drew last week. It's called an anablep, otherwise known as the four-eyed fish found in South America. This fish is unique in that it has very odd-looking eyes. It almost looks like it has two irises, or two pupils. It's called the four-eyed fish for a reason. And this fish is neat because it floats on the surface of the water with half of its eye out of the water and half of the eye underwater. And it's able to see predators or coming from above, and it can see its food down below. It can do very different things. This is a pretty amazing feat. They can see far away on top. How does it do that? And the way it does it is because the lens in the eye of this fish looks like a pear. It actually is thicker on the bottom, almost like a bifocal in glasses. This fish has a bifocal lens inside the eye, which allows it to see on top things up in the air and things close up underwater through different parts of this lens. Bifocal lens, a multifocal lens. Now, it would be neat if we could design it like this, but we don't have funny-looking eyes like that. But there is a lens out there called the Restore lens, and this lens has segments in it. One's for distance, one's for near, one's for distance, one's for near. They alternate back and forth, and they have two focal points, and these focal points give you good distance and good near vision. Are there downsides to it? Sure. This is that same lens inside a live patient. You can see those little rings in there, and this lens is in good position here. The downside to it is because you're only getting half the light for each distance, for near and far, you lose some contrast sensitivity. Lights aren't as light, darks aren't as dark. Most people don't notice this, but if you have any eye disease at all, early macular degeneration, it's going to cause problems. If you have diabetes or bleeding in the back of the eye, these crazy lenses are going to cause problems. For most people, they love it. They get a lot of that vision back, but there is a subset of people who have halos around lights, little rings around lights. It drives them nuts, and so it is not for everyone. I don't put that many of these in for that very reason, but the people who get them, as long as you screen properly and explain what to expect, are very, very happy with it. So it's a good technology, but it's not perfect yet. We're not quite there yet. So today, in modern life, we have three choices, roughly, as far as the implants that we use. The regular implants, I probably put in 95% of my patients. Tried and tested very good. On the other end of the spectrum, you have these multifocals that have some downsides with halos, nighttime vision, but can give a better range of focus. And somewhere in the middle are these toric implants that fix astigmatism. And if you have astigmatism, if you have enough of it, wonderful implant. Not much downside to it. Now, we've gone over a lot of things in the past 20 minutes. And I hope that I presented them in small enough bites to make this palatable. And I appreciate your attention, and thank you. Now, I have one last 10-minute lecture. It's short. I wasn't sure how long this would take. It looks like we're actually doing pretty good on time. So if you guys want to take like a 5-minute break, get food, whatever, this last little thing is going to be about 10 minutes, but basically for the past 2 weeks I made a cartoon animation of how an entire cataract surgery is done, from start to finish, from making the paracentesis, the keratome, to getting the pieces out. Okay. And so, okay.